The crowbar struck metal for the third time, sending sparks into the smoke-filled room. David Kimchi pressed his face mask tighter as flames still licked at the embassy walls around him. They had maybe 10 minutes before the Revolutionary Guards realized the building wasn't as empty as they thought. "It's opening," whispered his partner, a young Mossad operative named Rachel Amir, her hands wrapped in scorched gloves as she worked the damaged safe door. The Israel Prize medallion she wore, her cover as an academic, swung forward, catching the orange glow of dying fires. When the door finally gave way with a metallic groan, neither of them was prepared for what lay inside. Beneath the expected documents and cash sat a leather portfolio stamped with an eagle, an American seal. But it was the handwritten note paper clipped to the front that made David's blood run cold. "Shah's insurance policy," it read in Farsi, "for our friends in Jerusalem, if Tehran falls." Rachel's fingers trembled as she lifted the portfolio. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing faces neither expected to see: Soviet military advisors, American diplomats, and in the center, a young revolutionary with intense eyes and a black turban who would soon reshape the Middle East. But it was the last document that changed everything. A list of names in 3 columns: assets, targets, and ghosts. David recognized at least 5 names from Mossad's own operational files. Someone had been playing a deeper game than anyone imagined. "We need to go," Rachel hissed, stuffing the portfolio into her bag. "Now!" As they climbed back through the shattered window into Tehran's chaotic night, neither could know that what they carried would trigger the longest-running intelligence operation in Mossad's history, one that wouldn't fully unravel for another 40 years. Before we dive into this incredible true story of espionage, betrayal, and the documents that changed Middle Eastern intelligence forever, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. This is the kind of story they don't teach in history class, the real secrets behind the Iranian Revolution and what Israel discovered in those final chaotic days. Drop a comment below. What do you think was on that list? Stick around, because what happened next reads like a spy thriller, except every word is true. Chapter 1. The Last Night of the Old Regime, February 10th, 1979. Tehran burned. David Kimchi had been preparing for this moment for 3 weeks, ever since Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv received the coded message from their last remaining asset in Iran. "The Shah's peacock is dying. Prepare for winter." It was dramatic, certainly, but then again, Abraham Mizrahi always had a flair for the theatrical. The elderly jeweler had served as a Mossad informant for 23 years, surviving every regime change and political purge with the casual ease of a man who sold diamonds to whoever held power. Now Mizrahi was dead. His body had been discovered that morning hanging from a lamppost in Revolution Square, a cardboard sign around his neck declaring him a Zionist spy. The irony, David thought grimly, was that the Revolutionary Guards had gotten it exactly right, just 3 decades too late to matter. But Mizrahi's final transmission had included something unprecedented: the precise location of a safe inside the abandoned Swiss embassy building, along with a set of numbers that could only be a combination. "Shah's final gift," the message concluded. "Retrieve before the wolves claim everything." The Swiss had quietly evacuated their staff 2 days earlier as Ayatollah Khomeini's revolutionary forces swept through Tehran's streets. Their embassy, like so many foreign outposts in those final chaotic days, had been hastily abandoned. Files burned, champagne bottles smashed, carpets rolled and stacked by a door no one would ever use. The revolutionaries had already ransacked the American embassy. The British compound had been torched. Every Western power was running for the exits as the monarchy of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi collapsed like a sandcastle before a wave. David and Rachel had entered Iran separately, days apart, using Canadian passports that identified them as documentary filmmakers capturing the People's Revolution. Rachel's cover was better developed. She actually was a historian by training before Mossad recruited her, and her Persian was flawless, a gift from her grandmother who had emigrated from Shiraz in the 1940s. David's Farsi was functional but accented. He let Rachel do most of the talking. They had rendezvoused in the basement of a crumbling hotel near Lele Park, where a nervous Kurdish smuggler named Farid had provided them with Revolutionary Guard armbands, a crowbar, and a warning: whatever you're looking for, you have 2 hours, maybe 3. After that, the real security teams move in, and they shoot first. The Swiss embassy sat in darkness, its ornate facade scarred by smoke and graffiti. Someone had spray-painted "Death to Foreign Devils" across the main entrance in crude Farsi. The front door hung at an angle, its lock smashed. Inside, the smell of ash and petroleum was overwhelming. "Second floor, east wing," Rachel whispered, consulting the crude map Mizrahi had transmitted. "Corner office behind the bookshelf." They moved through corridors lined with shattered picture frames and torn curtains. Revolutionary forces had been here, certainly, but their ransacking had been hasty and crude, looking for weapons, cash, perhaps intelligence materials left in the open. They hadn't been searching for hidden safes behind false walls. The corner office had belonged to someone senior. The furniture was heavy oak, the remaining books leather-bound. A portrait of the Shah lay face down on the desk, its frame cracked. Rachel went to the bookshelf and began running her hands along the edges while David kept watch at the door. "Here," she said after a moment. The bookshelf swung outward with surprising smoothness, revealing a wall safe that looked like it had survived a fire. The metal was scorched and warped, the combination dial partially melted. "That's not good," David muttered. "Can you—" "The combination won't work," Rachel interrupted, examining the damaged mechanism. "But the fire weakened the lock cylinder. Give me the crowbar." For the next 8 minutes, Rachel worked methodically, levering the crowbar into gaps and applying steady pressure while David's nerves screamed at every creak and groan of settling timbers. Outside, they could hear distant chanting, occasional gunfire, the sounds of a city tearing itself apart and being reborn in blood and fervor. When the safe door finally opened, they both leaned in with flashlights. The contents were unexpected. Stacks of American dollars, maybe 50,000 worth. Swiss bearer bonds, a collection of diplomatic cables bound with string. And at the bottom, that leather portfolio with the American Eagle seal. Rachel opened it carefully. The photographs inside were recent, some clearly taken within the past month. Soviet KGB officers meeting with leftist militants. American CIA station chiefs in what looked like a safe house. French intelligence officers sharing documents with someone Rachel immediately recognized as a senior SAVAK agent, the Shah's notorious secret police. But it was the series of photographs in the middle that made David grab Rachel's arm. A young cleric with a black turban and piercing dark eyes, sitting in what appeared to be a Paris apartment, surrounded by documents and maps. In 3 of the photos, he was meeting with a man David knew well, James Harrington, a CIA operations officer who supposedly worked cultural attaché duties. "That's Khomeini," Rachel breathed. These were taken in France during his exile. Why would the CIA be meeting with— "Look at the date stamps," Rachel interrupted. "These are from 1978, before the revolution succeeded, before anyone thought Khomeini would actually take power." The implications hit them both simultaneously. The CIA had been hedging its bets, maintaining contact with revolutionary leaders, even while publicly supporting the Shah. It was pragmatic, certainly, but the existence of these photographs suggested something more complex than simple diplomatic insurance. The handwritten note clipped to the front of the portfolio was written on plain paper in elegant Farsi script. Shah's insurance policy. For our friends in Jerusalem, if Tehran falls, the game is deeper than any of us imagined. Trust no one who claims a single loyalty. M. The signature was simply an initial, but David knew the handwriting. General Mansour Qajar, head of Savak's Foreign Intelligence Division and one of Israel's most valuable and expensive intelligence partners for over a decade. If Qajar had assembled this portfolio specifically for Mossad, it meant he had known the end was coming and wanted to leave breadcrumbs. The final document in the portfolio made everything else fade to insignificance. It was a list, typed on onion skin paper, organized in 3 columns with headers in English. Assets, targets, and ghosts. The assets column contained 23 names, including 5 David recognized as current or former Mossad operatives who had worked in Iran, Lebanon, and Syria. Someone had been tracking Israel's intelligence network with disturbing precision. The targets column listed locations and individuals, embassies, military installations, politicians, intellectuals. Some had already been attacked in the revolution's early days. Others were clearly marked for future operations. But it was the ghosts column that would haunt David for the rest of his career. 11 names, each followed by 2 dates and a code number. The first date was always from the 1950s or 1960s. The second date was recent, all within the past 5 years, and the code numbers matched nothing in any intelligence database David knew. One name jumped out immediately: Reza Pahlavi Bakhtiar, 1953-1978, Oracle 7. Shapur Bakhtiar was the Shah's last prime minister, appointed in a desperate attempt to forestall revolution. But this entry suggested Bakhtiar had been something else entirely. A long-term intelligence asset planted decades earlier during the CIA's 1953 coup that had restored the Shah to power. Oracle 7 implied there were at least 6 others. Rachel was photographing every page with a miniature camera disguised as a cigarette lighter. "We need to move," she said. "I'm hearing voices downstairs." David grabbed the portfolio, stuffing it into the leather messenger bag they'd brought for exactly this purpose. He left the money and bonds, too risky to carry, too tempting to explain if caught. Rachel quickly repositioned the bookshelf, not perfectly, but well enough to buy them a few extra minutes if anyone came looking. They had just reached the second-floor landing when footsteps echoed from below. Heavy boots, multiple people, and voices speaking in the clipped tones of military men who expected to be obeyed. "Pasdaran," Rachel whispered. "Revolutionary Guards." There was no way down without encountering them. David pointed to a window at the end of the hallway, their planned emergency exit. They moved quickly but quietly, Rachel's soft shoes nearly silent on the debris-strewn carpet, while David's heavier boots seemed to boom like thunder drums in his hypersensitive ears. The window opened onto a narrow ledge that ran along the building's exterior. Below, about 20 feet down, was an overgrown garden that had once been manicured but was now a wilderness of thorns and shadows. Not ideal, but survivable. Behind them they heard the Revolutionary Guards reaching the second floor, doors being kicked open, voices calling out in aggressive challenges to anyone who might be hiding. David went through first, turning to help Rachel onto the ledge. The night air was cool after the smoke-filled building, and for just a moment, Tehran spread out before them, a city transformed, ancient and modern, burning and being born. Then Rachel's foot slipped. She caught herself on the window frame, but her bag swung out and struck the wall with an audible thump. Inside the building, the voices stopped. Then came the sound David had been dreading, running footsteps moving toward their corridor. "Jump!" Rachel said. "Now!" They dropped together into the darkness, hitting the overgrown garden with twin crashes that seemed apocalyptically loud in David's ears. Pain shot through his left ankle, but he forced himself up, grabbing Rachel's hand as flashlight beams swept the window above. They ran. Chapter 2. The Oracle Network. 6 weeks later, David Kimche sat in a windowless conference room deep inside Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, watching as the director studied the documents spread across the polished mahogany table. Yitzhak Hoffi was a careful man, methodical and quiet, known for thinking 3 moves ahead in a game most people didn't even realize they were playing. Oracle 7, Hoffi said finally, tapping the list. You understand what this implies? A network, David replied. Deep cover assets planted during the 53 coup, maybe earlier, sleeper agents who've been active for 25 years or more. Planted by whom? Hoffi asked. The Americans? The British? Us? It was the question that had kept David awake for 42 consecutive nights. The ghost column suggested a joint operation that crossed national intelligence boundaries, something that should have been impossible during the height of the Cold War, yet here was the evidence, typed on paper, that had sat in a Swiss embassy safe, waiting to be discovered. Rachel had made it out of Iran through the northern border, crossing into Turkey with the help of Armenian smugglers who asked no questions as long as the American dollars kept flowing. David had taken the southern route, bribing his way onto a cargo ship in Bandar Abbas that eventually deposited him in Dubai. They had been debriefed separately for 5 days before being allowed to compare notes. The portfolio's contents had been analyzed by 3 different departments. The photographs had been verified as authentic. The list of assets had caused a minor earthquake when it was discovered that 2 of the names belonged to active Israeli operatives who had no idea their covers had been compromised. Both had been extracted immediately. Their networks rolled up before someone decided to use that information. But it was the ghost column that consumed all of Hoffi's attention. If the dates were accurate, these agents had been positioned at the highest levels of Iranian society for a quarter century, slowly working their way into positions of influence while maintaining perfect cover. We've identified 8 of the 11 names, said Dr. Sarah Feldman, Mossad's chief analyst, a thin woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She activated a projector, and faces appeared on the wall. 3 are dead, natural causes as far as we can determine. 5 are still active in various capacities within the new revolutionary government. The faces on the wall were familiar to anyone who followed Iranian politics. A deputy minister of intelligence, a senior Revolutionary Guard commander, a prominent Ayatollah who served on Khomeini's inner advisory council, a judge who had overseen dozens of revolutionary trials, and most shockingly, a journalist whose writings had helped galvanize popular support for the Islamic Revolution. They're on both sides, David said, understanding dawning. These aren't just Shah loyalists who got turned. These are people who helped bring down the Shah. Precisely, Feldman said, which means whoever ran the Oracle network wasn't interested in preserving the monarchy. They were interested in controlling what came next. Rachel spoke for the first time since the meeting began. The dates suggest they were activated in waves. 1953 through 1955 for the first group, then 1961 through 1963 for the second, and a final group between 1972 and 1974. The timing matches historical events, Feldman continued. The 53 coup and its immediate aftermath, the Kennedy administration's pressure on the Shah to reform, and finally, the oil crisis and the Shah's last consolidation of power. She paused. Someone was planning for multiple contingencies, positioning assets across different scenarios, ensuring they had influence regardless of which way Iran evolved. Hoffi studied the faces on the wall. Have we attempted to make contact with any of them? Not yet, Feldman said. We don't know their operational protocols. We don't know who their handlers were or are. We don't even know if they're aware of each other. Making contact without proper authentication codes could expose them, or expose us. David leaned forward. There's something else. General Qajar assembled this portfolio specifically for us. Why? What did he want us to do with it? Maybe he wanted insurance, Rachel suggested. Qajar knew Savak was finished. He knew what the revolutionaries would do to anyone connected to the Shah's intelligence services. This was his ticket out, proof that he had something valuable to trade. Then why leave it in a safe instead of bringing it directly to us? Hofi asked. The question hung in the air. David had been wrestling with it since Tehran. Qajar had access to Mossad communication channels. He could have defected directly, brought the portfolio with him, lived comfortably in Tel Aviv under protection. Instead, he had hidden it and sent a cryptic message through a dying informant. Because he didn't trust us, David said quietly. Or more precisely, he didn't trust that we weren't compromised. If Savak files contained accurate information on 5 Israeli operatives, someone was leaking. Hofi's expression didn't change, but David saw something flicker in his eyes. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or worry. The possibility of a mole inside Mossad wasn't new. It was the nightmare that kept every intelligence director awake at night, but confirmation was another matter entirely. We need to find out who ran Oracle, Hofi said. That's priority 1. Until we know who established this network and why, we can't trust anything the portfolio tells us. Sarah, I want deep background on all 11 ghosts. Where they were in 1953, who recruited them, what their connections were. Go back to British petroleum records, CIA cables, MI6 archives, anything you can access. We'll need American cooperation, Feldman noted. Most of those files are still classified. Then we trade, Hofi said. We have something they want, proof their precious revolutionary friends are actually intelligence assets planted decades ago. They'll deal. David wasn't convinced the Americans would be eager to cooperate. If the Oracle network had been a CIA operation, and that M initial on Qajar's note might stand for multiple handlers rather than the general himself, then Washington would want the information buried, not shared with a foreign intelligence service, even an allied one. The meeting broke up with assignments distributed and timelines set. David was tasked with tracking down former CIA officers who had served in Tehran during the relevant periods. Rachel would focus on the Soviet angle. If the KGB had somehow penetrated or turned the Oracle network, that changed everything. As they left the conference room, Rachel pulled David aside. There's something I didn't mention in the meeting, she said quietly. One of the names in the ghost column, Reza Pahlavi Bakhtiar, the Oracle 7 designation. What about it? I did some preliminary research before today. Shapur Bakhtiar wasn't just the Shah's last prime minister. In 1953, when he was much younger, he briefly worked as a translator for the American embassy. His file says he quit after 6 months to return to academic work. But the timing is exact, right when the coup was being planned. David felt a chill. You think the Americans recruited him then? Planted him for a quarter century until they needed him? I think someone did, Rachel said. But here's what bothers me. Bakhtiar was genuinely opposed to the Shah's authoritarianism. His entire political career was built on pushing for democratic reforms. When Khomeini's people denounced him as a Shah puppet, it seemed like revolutionary rhetoric. But what if they were partly right? What if Bakhtiar was serving multiple masters and nobody knew the full picture? Where is Bakhtiar now? Still in Tehran, trying to hold together a government that has no real power. The Revolutionary Council makes all the actual decisions. Khomeini's people control the streets. Bakhtiar is a figurehead. Rachel paused. Unless he's still operational, unless Oracle 7 is still active, reporting back to whoever runs the network. They walked in silence toward the elevator. David's mind was racing through possibilities, each more complex than the last. Intelligence work was often described as a chess game, but that was too simple. Chess had rules, clear objectives, pieces that moved in predictable ways. This was something else, three-dimensional, with players who could change the rules mid-game and pieces that didn't know what side they were really on. That evening, David went home to his small apartment in Tel Aviv and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. He didn't usually drink alone, but the Tehran operation had left him rattled in ways he couldn't fully articulate. He kept seeing Rachel's foot slipping on that ledge, kept hearing the Revolutionary Guard's voices getting closer, kept wondering what would have happened if they'd been caught with that portfolio. The phone rang at midnight. David answered to hear Hoffy's voice, calm but urgent. "We have a problem. Sarah just received a cable from our station in Paris. General Qajar's body was found in the Seine this morning. French police are calling it suicide." David's hand tightened on the phone. "You don't believe that." Qajar survived 3 decades in Savak. He knew every trick, every surveillance technique, every way to stay alive in a profession where most people don't make it 5 years. And now, 6 weeks after his portfolio ends up in our hands, he conveniently drowns himself in Paris. Hoffy's skepticism was clear. Someone wanted him silent. The question is who? The revolutionaries. Possible, but they've been executing Shah officials publicly, making examples of them. This is different, quiet, professional, designed to look like suicide. This is the work of intelligence professionals, not revolutionary tribunals. David thought about the implications. If someone killed Qajar to keep him quiet about Oracle, that means the network is still active, still important enough to kill for. "That's my assessment," Hoffy said, "which means you and Rachel are now the only people outside the network who know its full scope. I'm putting both of you in protective status, effective immediately. No field operations, no public appearances, no patterns that anyone could exploit." "Sir, with respect, we need to be working this. We're the ones who retrieved the portfolio. We know, you know enough to be targets," Hoffy interrupted. "Qajar's death proves someone is cleaning up loose ends. I won't lose 2 of my best operatives because they're too stubborn to recognize they're exposed." The line went dead. David sat in darkness, scotch forgotten, thinking about a man he'd never met floating face down in a Paris river. Qajar had tried to leave a message, tried to expose something he thought was important enough to risk everything. And now he was dead. The next morning, David reported to a safe house in Herzliya, a quiet suburb north of Tel Aviv. Rachel was already there, looking as frustrated as he felt. They spent 3 days in isolation while Hoffy's security team swept their apartments, analyzed their recent contacts, and tried to determine if either of them had been compromised. On the 4th day, Dr. Feldman arrived with an unmarked folder. "We've made progress," she said without preamble. "The Americans were more cooperative than expected. When we showed them evidence that several current Iranian revolutionary officials were long-term intelligence assets, Langley practically fell over itself to help." She spread photographs on the table. "This is Kermit Roosevelt, Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, and the CIA officer who planned the '53 coup. After the operation, he remained involved in Iranian affairs through the late 1950s. These are his operational reports from that period, finally declassified after we applied the right pressure." David leaned in to read. The language was careful, bureaucratic, but the implications were clear. Roosevelt had indeed recruited a network of assets during and after the coup, young Iranians from influential families who could be positioned for long-term influence. The reports called it Operation Oracle and described it as insurance against future instability. "So it was an American operation," Rachel said. "Initially," Feldman replied, "but here's where it gets interesting. In 1959, Roosevelt left the CIA and went into private business, working for Gulf Oil. His control of the Oracle network was transferred to a joint oversight committee, CIA, MI6, and according to these notes, Mediterranean partners, which in intelligence speak often meant us. David sat back, processing. A joint intelligence network shared between 3 services. That's unprecedented. It's also unstable, Feldman said. Too many masters, too many competing agendas. By the mid-1960s, according to these files, the network had effectively gone dark. Agents stopped reporting. Handlers lost contact. Everyone assumed Oracle had been compromised or disbanded. But it wasn't, Rachel said. It went independent. The agents kept their positions, kept building their influence, but they weren't answering to anyone. They became their own operation. Feldman nodded slowly. That's our working theory. 11 intelligence assets planted across Iranian society who spent 2 decades building legitimate careers and real influence while maintaining no contact with their original handlers. By 1979, when the revolution came, they weren't Western agents anymore. They were genuinely powerful Iranians who happened to have training and connections most people didn't know about. Some sided with the Shah, David said, thinking it through. Others joined the revolution. They spread their bets across both outcomes because they weren't serving an ideology. They were serving themselves. Or serving something else, Feldman said cryptically. She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a group of men at what appeared to be a formal dinner. This was taken in London, 1957. That's Kermit Roosevelt on the left. Next to him is Kim Philby, who we now know was a Soviet double agent. And on the right, she pointed to a distinguished-looking man in his 40s. That's Adrian Stokes, MI6 Deputy Director for Middle Eastern Affairs. Rachel stared at the photograph. Philby had access to Oracle, not just access. According to the timeline, Philby was part of the Joint Oversight Committee until he defected to Moscow in 1963, which means the Soviets knew about Oracle. They knew the identities, the positions, everything. The implications were staggering. If Soviet intelligence knew about the Oracle network, they could have turned some of the agents, could have manipulated them, could have used them to influence Iranian politics for their own purposes. The neat story of a Western intelligence network going rogue suddenly became much more complicated. "So what do we have?" David asked, trying to organize the chaos into something coherent. 11 agents, planted in 1953. Nominally controlled by a joint CIA-MI6 Mossad committee, but actually compromised by Soviet intelligence through Philby. By the 1960s, the network goes dark and independent. 20 years later, when Iran explodes, some of these agents are positioned on both sides of the revolution. And when one of them, Qajar, tries to expose the whole operation, he ends up dead in Paris. That's the shape of it, Feldman agreed. But we're missing the crucial piece. Who's running Oracle now? Who benefits from keeping these agents in place? And what's their endgame? Chapter 3. The Ayatollah's Advisor. 3 months after retrieving the portfolio, David Kimche found himself in Istanbul, sitting in a cafe near the Grand Bazaar, waiting for a man who might not come. The meeting had been arranged through 5 different intermediaries, each knowing only a small part of the message they carried. The final instruction had been typically cryptic. Thursday, noon, the cafe where spies pretend to be tourists. At 12:17, a heavy-set man in his 60s eased into the chair across from David. His face was deeply lined, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes were sharp and evaluating. He ordered tea and flawless Turkish before turning his attention to David. "Mr. Kimche," he said in English with an American accent. "Or should I say, the man interested in ancient history?" "Mr. Harrington," David replied, recognizing the CIA officer from the photographs in Qajar's portfolio. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. James Harrington had retired from the CIA in 1977, 2 years before the revolution. According to the official records David had reviewed, Harrington had spent his final posting running cultural exchange programs from the Tehran embassy. The photographs from the portfolio told a different story. This was an operations officer with deep connections to people who mattered. "I heard about General Qajar," Harrington said, stirring his tea slowly. "Paris is lovely in spring, but the Seine is cold even in summer. A bad way to go." "Was it suicide?" Harrington smiled without humor. "Do you really need me to answer that? You retrieved his final gift, I presume, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation." David made a calculated decision. The portfolio contained photographs, including several of you meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini in Paris before the revolution. "Yes, I imagine it would. Mansour was a thorough man, too thorough for his own good, as it turns out." Harrington sipped his tea. "Tell me, what did you make of the ghost column?" "A joint intelligence operation that went independent. Assets planted during the '53 coup, who built real influence over 25 years. Some sided with the Shah, others joined the revolution. Now they're positioned across the new Iranian government, and someone is willing to kill to keep that network protected." "Not bad," Harrington said. "You're missing a few key details, but the overall picture is accurate. I assume you want to know who's running Oracle now?" "Among other things." Harrington leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "The problem with long-term intelligence operations is that they take on a life of their own. You recruit an asset when he's 25, full of idealism and willing to serve. 20 years later, he's 45. He has power, wealth, family, a real life. The ideology that motivated him at 25 seems naive. The handlers who recruited him are retired or dead, and he starts asking himself, why am I doing this? Who am I really serving? You're saying Oracle went rogue because the agents outgrew their handlers? I'm saying they evolved beyond the original mission parameters, Harrington corrected. In 1953, we wanted stability. We wanted an Iran that was friendly to Western interests, anti-Soviet, and willing to sell us oil at reasonable prices. The Oracle network was designed to ensure that outcome regardless of who sat on the peacock throne. But somewhere in the 1960s, the agents realized they had real power. They weren't just collecting intelligence and influencing decisions, they were making the decisions. David thought about the faces on Feldman's wall. The Deputy Intelligence Minister, the Revolutionary Guard Commander, the Ayatollah on Khomeini's council. They're not serving Western interests. They helped create the Islamic Republic. Did they? Harrington asked. Or did they help create a specific version of the Islamic Republic? One that talks a revolutionary game but maintains certain practical arrangements. One that denounces America in public while quietly ensuring Iran's oil keeps flowing. One that's fanatically anti-Israeli in rhetoric but has never actually mobilized for full war. The implications hit David like cold water. You're saying the revolution was engineered, controlled. I'm saying revolutions are like forest fires. They can be encouraged, channeled, directed if you have people in the right positions. Could the Oracle network have prevented Khomeini's return? No. Could they have shaped what came after? Absolutely. Harrington's eyes were hard. The Shah was finished. He was dying, his regime was corrupt, and popular anger was real. But the question of who would replace him, that was more open than most people realize. David's mind raced through the possibilities. Bakhtiar, the last prime minister, Oracle 7. He was supposed to be the moderate alternative, wasn't he? The democratic transition that would prevent radical Islamic rule. Shapur was a good man, Harrington said quietly. Genuinely believed in reform, democracy, human rights. That's why we recruited him in '53. He had authentic credentials as a reformer. For 25 years, he built that reputation, always pushing for liberalization, always opposing the Shah's excesses. By 1979, he was perfectly positioned to be the acceptable face of change. But Khomeini outmaneuvered him. Did he? Or was Shapur's failure built into the plan? Harrington's voice dropped lower. Think about it. Bakhtiar takes power, tries to implement reforms, but he's fatally compromised because he was appointed by the Shah. The revolutionaries reject him as a puppet. He fails, he flees into exile, and Khomeini's hardliners consolidate power. And this is crucial, those hardliners include several Oracle assets who are now perfectly positioned as trusted revolutionary leaders. David felt sick. You're saying Bakhtiar was sacrificed, set up to fail so the real Oracle agents could succeed. I'm saying intelligence operations are complex and people serve multiple purposes. Harrington's face was carefully neutral. Shapur thought he was serving Iranian democracy. His handlers thought he was serving Western interests, and the network itself, they were serving something else entirely. What? Harrington signaled for more tea before answering. In 1963, when Oracle went dark, there was a meeting, London, a small group, Americans, British, Israelis, and one other party that isn't in any official records. They made a decision. Iran was too important to be left to governments, regardless of who ruled in Tehran, whether Shah or Sultan or Ayatollah. There needed to be a mechanism for ensuring certain basic arrangements held. Oil flow, regional stability, no Soviet takeover, no genuine radical chaos. A shadow government, David said, permanent bureaucrats who survive regime changes. A practical arrangement, Harrington corrected. Every country has bureaucrats who outlast politicians. We just made sure some of ours were exceptionally well positioned. And when the revolution came, those same people ensured that despite all the radical rhetoric, the fundamentals remained stable. Iran still sells oil. The banks still function. The Revolutionary Guards are fanatical about ideology, but someone has to actually run a country, and running a country requires pragmatists. David thought about the deputy intelligence minister, the senior judge, the journalist. How many of them know about the others? Does Oracle still function as a network, or are they individual operators? That's the beautiful part, Harrington said, with something like admiration in his voice. After '63, they never communicated as a network. Each agent operated independently, building their own careers and connections. Some probably forgot they were ever recruited. Others remembered but considered it ancient history. But they were all selected for specific qualities: pragmatism, flexibility, the ability to survive regime changes. So when the revolution came, they instinctively did what they'd been trained to do: adapt, position themselves on the winning side, and maintain practical arrangements. And Qajar? Where did he fit? Harrington's expression darkened. Mansour was always too clever for his own good. He figured out the network existed, not the full picture, but enough to be dangerous. He thought he could use that knowledge as leverage, as insurance for his own survival. He assembled that portfolio thinking it made him valuable, that we'd protect him. He didn't understand that the whole point of Oracle was that it couldn't be exposed. The moment he tried to trade that information, he signed his own death warrant. Who killed him? Does it matter? Could have been the French, cleaning up a messy defector. Could have been the Iranians, eliminating a traitor. Could have been someone from the network itself, protecting their anonymity. In the intelligence world, there are some secrets that kill anyone who tries to reveal them. David met Harrington's eyes. Are you going to kill me? The older man laughed. A genuine sound that seemed out of place in their grim conversation. If I wanted you dead, Mr. Kimche, you wouldn't have made it to this cafe. No, I'm telling you all this because you need to understand what you're dealing with. That portfolio you recovered, it's incomplete, deliberately so. Mansour knew 11 names, but Oracle was always bigger than that. There are assets he never knew about, layers he never penetrated, and the people running it now aren't Americans or British or Israelis, they're the agents themselves, working together in loose coordination to maintain stability. For whose benefit? For everyone's, Harrington said simply. The West gets oil and regional stability. Iran gets a government that's revolutionary enough to satisfy popular anger, but pragmatic enough to function. The Soviets are kept at bay. Israel isn't facing a genuinely unified Islamic front. Everyone gets something, which means everyone has an incentive to let Oracle keep operating in the shadows. David thought about Hofi's warning, about Qajar floating in the Seine, about the complexity of trying to expose a network that served too many interests to be safely revealed. What do you want from me? I want you to stop investigating, Harrington said bluntly. You've been asking questions, making connections, talking to people who'd rather not be talked to. That makes you a problem. So I'm offering you a deal, walk away, forget about Oracle, and I'll make sure no one bothers you or your partner. Keep pushing, and I can't guarantee anyone's safety, not yours, not Rachel's, not anyone else who gets drawn into this. And if I refuse? Harrington stood, leaving money on the table for the tea. Then you'll learn the same lesson Mansour did. Some secrets are bigger than any one person, any one agency, any one government. Oracle isn't good or evil, it's a mechanism, a tool for managing complexity in a complicated region. The people who benefit from it will protect it, and they have resources you can't imagine. He walked away, leaving David alone with cold tea and colder thoughts. Through the cafe window, Istanbul stretched out in its ancient glory, a city that had survived empires and revolutions. A place where East met West and somehow the world kept turning. David paid his own tab and walked out into bright sunshine, his mind churning. Harrington's offer was clear. Take the deal, protect Rachel and himself, let Oracle continue its shadow work. The pragmatic choice, the safe choice, but pragmatism had its limits. Somewhere in Tehran, 11 agents, maybe more, were shaping a nation's future while claiming to serve revolutionary principles they'd been trained to manipulate. Somewhere, people were making decisions that affected millions of lives, and they answered to no one but themselves.